When Cherry Blossoms Whisper. Volume 2, Summer's Fragile Heart. Chapter 1, Beachside Secrets. The sun was a blazing orb in the sky, casting its golden rays down on the coastal town where Haruto and the others had gathered. It was the first day of summer break and the air felt thick with the scent of salt and fresh ocean breeze. The student council had organized a beachside cleanup at a local shrine, and while most students were excited for the summer freedom ahead, Haruto couldn't help but feel a strange tension in the air, especially with Sakura by his side. The bus ride to the beach had been full of chatter and excitement, but Haruto had barely registered the conversation around him. His mind kept drifting to what Sakura had said to him under the cherry tree. Her words lingered in his thoughts like a puzzle he couldn't quite solve. Everything changes. It wasn't like her to open up, and Haruto had learned not to push her when she didn't want to talk. But something about the way she had said it, the vulnerability in her voice, made him think that the burden of her past was something far heavier than he had imagined. He didn't know what had happened to her father, but the thought that it might have something to do with the water, the same thing that made her so uneasy today, troubled him. As they reached the beach, the noise from the bus slowly faded into the sounds of the waves crashing against the shore. Sakura stood off to the side, her gaze fixed on the ocean, her body tense as if the sight of the water made her want to retreat. Haruto couldn't help but notice how distant she was. Despite the summer heat, Sakura had wrapped herself in a light cardigan, her arms crossed protectively over her chest. He saw her glance at the waves, her face tight with discomfort. She was trying to hide it, but Haruto could sense the unease rolling off her. "Are you okay?" Haruto asked softly, walking up beside her. She flinched slightly, turning to face him with a blank expression. "I'm fine, just not a fan of the ocean." Haruto raised an eyebrow, but before he could press further, Yui, the student council president, appeared, holding a clipboard and looking very official despite the casual beach setting. "All right, everyone," Yui called out, her usual manipulative charm replaced with an oddly serious tone. "We're here to clean up the shrine area, so grab a bucket and let's get to work." The students scattered, many of them eagerly picking up cleaning supplies, while others were distracted by the beach's beauty. Haruto noticed Sakura's eyes flickering nervously toward the shoreline. She seemed torn, her gaze shifting between the group and the ocean. "You don't have to do this if you don't want to," Haruto said gently, his eyes locked on hers. Sakura gave a quick shake of her head, trying to force a smile. "I'm fine. I'll help." He didn't press her further. She was determined to hide whatever pain she was carrying, but Haruto couldn't ignore the way she was gripping her cardigan, as though it was the only thing holding her together. The group made its way to the shrine after a few hours of beach cleanup. Haruto took a quiet moment to himself, noticing the way the sunlight shimmered off the water. His thoughts, though, were still occupied by Sakura. What was she running from? He wasn't sure, but he knew she wasn't the type to let things go easily. Suddenly, he heard a soft voice from behind him. "I need to step out for a moment," Sakura said, her tone distant, but not cold. Haruto turned to face her, noticing the way her body was tense, her eyes fixated on the water. "Sakura, I'll be back in a few minutes," she said firmly, but her voice wavered just enough for Haruto to sense the fear she was trying to hide. Without another word, she walked away, heading toward the cliffs at the edge of the beach. Haruto watched her retreating figure, torn between following her and respecting her space. He knew she wasn't ready to share whatever was haunting her, but part of him couldn't just stand by and let her deal with it alone. He decided to follow her. When Haruto reached the cliffs, he found Sakura standing near the edge, looking out at the ocean. The wind had picked up, rustling her hair and pulling at the sleeves of her cardigan. She was so focused on the horizon, her back to him, that she didn't hear him approach. "Sakura," Haruto called out softly, taking a step closer. She didn't respond, but her shoulders tensed. Haruto stopped a few feet behind her, unsure of what to say. The distance between them felt more significant than it ever had before. But still, he couldn't ignore the way his heart ached for her. "What's wrong?" he asked gently. For a long moment, there was only the sound of the waves crashing against the rocks below. Finally, Sakura spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm scared of the water. I always have been." Haruto blinked, surprised by the admission. "Scared of it? Why?" She hesitated, her fingers gripping the edge of the cliff as she stared out at the vast ocean. "When I was younger, my father drowned. I was too small to do anything. I just watched." The confession hit Haruto like a wave, and for a moment he couldn't speak. The weight of what she had just said hung heavily in the air. Sakura turned to face him, her eyes filled with a quiet sorrow that was hard to bear. I know I can't change the past, but every time I see the water, it feels like I'm still standing there, helpless. I don't know how to let go. Haruto's heart broke for her, but he knew this was a moment she had to face on her own. Still, he couldn't let her carry the pain alone. You don't have to face it alone, Sakura, he said softly, stepping closer. I'm here. Whenever you're ready. Her eyes searched his face, and for a fleeting moment, Haruto thought he saw a crack in her tough exterior. But then she blinked and the vulnerability vanished. Thanks, she murmured, turning back toward the water. But, not yet. Maybe someday. Haruto nodded, silently accepting her words, knowing that someday might come sooner than either of them realized. Chapter 2, Kaido's Love Disaster. The day after the beach cleanup, the heat of the summer sun was unrelenting. Haruto and his friends were back at school, but summer had taken over everything. The halls, usually bustling with the hum of schoolwork, now felt like a distant memory as students prepared for their summer breaks. Yet, there was no rest for the student council members who had just wrapped up a grueling meeting about the festival preparations. It was late afternoon when Haruto found himself sitting on the edge of the school's rooftop, sketchbook in hand, the cool breeze doing little to calm his simmering thoughts. His encounter with Sakura at the beach had left him unsettled, but he hadn't pushed her. For now, he would respect her space. His attention shifted as he heard a familiar, chaotic voice from below. Haruto! Haruto! Kaido's voice rang out loud and unmistakable. Haruto glanced down to see his childhood friend sprinting up the stairs, his face flushed with excitement. Kaido's energy had been impossible to contain ever since he'd learned about his crush on Rin, the sharp-tongued girl from the literature club who also happened to be Sakura's rival. Haruto had always found Kaido's antics amusing, but lately the chaos seemed more like a cover-up for something deeper. Kaido had always been a bit of a mystery when it came to love. What's up? Haruto asked, putting his sketchbook down and leaning back against the wall. Kaido took the last few steps two at a time, his breath heavy from running. I need your help, man, he panted, looking around as though someone might be eavesdropping. I've got this romantic idea, and I need your expertise. Haruto raised an eyebrow. Romantic? You're going to need more than my expertise for that. Kaido grinned, pulling out a crumpled piece of paper from his pocket. I'm going to confess to Rin. Haruto didn't respond right away, waiting for Kaido to explain further. Confessing to Rin, huh? That was bold. And risky. Rin could be icy at the best of times, so Kaido's love confession would either be a disaster or a triumph. Okay, so what's the plan? Haruto asked, leaning forward now. He knew this was going to be good or terrible. All right, get this, Kaido said, eyes sparkling. I'm going to do it in front of the whole school. And I've written a poem for her. A ramen-themed poem. Haruto blinked, unsure whether to laugh or cringe. A ramen poem? Yeah. You know Rin loves literature, so it'll be, like, poetic and unique. I thought, what better way to show her my feelings than with something she's passionate about? Food. Literature. It's perfect. Kaido's enthusiasm was practically overflowing, but Haruto couldn't help but feel concerned. That's one way to put it. Haruto's voice was dry. Are you sure this is a good idea? Rin's, well, she's not exactly the romantic type. Kaido waved his concern away with a dismissive gesture. Nonsense. I've got this in the bag. A little ramen poetry and she'll be all over me. Haruto smirked. You sure you're not setting yourself up for a disaster? Kaido paused for a moment as if considering the possibility. Well, maybe. But you know what? I've got to try. Otherwise, I'll never know, right? Haruto couldn't argue with that logic. All right then. If you're really going through with it, I'll help. But I think you should make sure you're ready for anything. Kaido gave a dramatic salute. Thanks, Haruto. You're the best. The next day, the student council room was filled with chaos. The final preparations for the summer festival were underway, but Kaido's mind was clearly elsewhere. He couldn't stop fidgeting with his phone, checking and rechecking his poem. The tension was palpable, especially for Haruto, who could sense the brewing disaster waiting to happen. The festival was fast approaching, and with it, Kaido's impending confession. He had gone to great lengths, creating the perfect ramen-themed poem that he was sure would win Rin's heart. The question, however, was whether Rin was even the slightest bit interested. Haruto wasn't sure, but one thing was certain. Kaido had put himself out there in a way that most people wouldn't dare. By lunchtime, everyone had gathered in the courtyard, where Kaido had planned his dramatic confession. Rin, as expected, was sitting with her usual group, quiet and observant, her sharp eyes scanning the crowd. Haruto watched from the sidelines, a little worried, but also a little entertained. This was going to be something. Kaido stood at the front of the courtyard, holding a small piece of paper. He cleared his throat loudly, grabbing everyone's attention. "Attention, everyone!" he bellowed, his voice echoing across the courtyard. "I have an important confession to make." The students fell silent, curious to see what Kaido was up to now. Rin looked up from her book, eyebrows raised in surprise. Kaido took a deep breath and began reading his poem with dramatic flair. "Ramen. Oh ramen, your noodles so fine. With broth so rich, I think you're divine. But it's you, Rin, that I want by my side. Together we'll slurp and together we'll glide." There was a moment of stunned silence before the courtyard erupted into laughter. Some students clapped while others snickered behind their hands. Rin's face flushed with a mixture of embarrassment and disbelief. Haruto could barely contain his laughter watching Kaido stand there, unfazed by the commotion. But then something unexpected happened. Rin stood up, a slight blush on her cheeks. Her expression was a mix of frustration and something else, maybe embarrassment or maybe even curiosity. Rin began, looking at Kaido with a scowl, "The most ridiculous thing I've ever heard." Kaido didn't seem to mind the teasing. In fact, he grinned wider, unfazed by the rejection. "I know it's not perfect, but I had to try." Rin's gaze softened just a little as she crossed her arms. "You're insane, but it was funny." Kaido's grin grew wider. "So, that's a yes, right?" Rin shook her head with a chuckle, but her lips twitched upward in a reluctant smile. "You're an idiot, Kaido. But I guess you've got guts. I'll give you that." The tension in the air eased as the students around them began to laugh, the awkwardness fading away into light-hearted amusement. Chapter 3, Café Chaos. The Aizawa family cafe, a cozy, somewhat rustic place nestled in a quiet corner of the town. The smell of freshly brewed coffee, pastries, and grilled vegetables fills the air. It's a warm, late afternoon with the sun casting long shadows through the cafe windows. Haruto hadn't expected to spend his Saturday at Sakura's family cafe, but here he was, standing behind the counter in an apron, attempting and failing to flip pancakes. Sakura had invited him after a series of awkward interactions following their time at the beach cleanup. Her invitation wasn't out of affection, he knew that it was more of a "let's put this weird tension behind us" gesture. But still, Haruto couldn't ignore the strange, warm feeling that gnawed at him as he watched her work. He glanced over at Sakura, who was busy behind the counter, chatting with her mother. The cafe was a second home to her, and it was clear that she was in her element here. Her movements were smooth and purposeful as she arranged cups, refilled teapots, and handled customers like a seasoned professional. Haruto tried again to flip the pancake, but it stuck to the griddle. The spatula scraped the surface in a way that made him cringe. He muttered under his breath, "This is harder than it looks." From the kitchen window, Mrs. Aizawa's voice called out, "Haruto, if you're going to help, at least don't set the pancakes on fire." Right, Haruto replied, a little embarrassed. He wiped his brow and tried to look like he knew what he was doing. But in truth, cooking was one of the few things Haruto had never mastered. His talents were more artistic than culinary. Sakura, who had been watching the situation unfold from behind the counter, couldn't hold back her amusement. She raised an eyebrow, her voice teasing. "You know, I didn't invite you here to make a mess in my kitchen." Haruto glared at her playfully. "Hey, it's not my fault your pancakes are rebellious." She chuckled softly, her eyes glimmering with the faintest trace of warmth. "I should have known better than to ask you to help. You can't even cook instant noodles without burning them." "Hey, that was one time," Haruto retorted, his voice mock-offended. "Besides, I can handle the art of food. But I guess pancakes aren't my medium." Sakura's laughter softened the space between them, a break in the usual tension. It was moments like this that made Haruto forget about the complexities of their relationship. It almost felt easy, comfortable. Just then, Mrs. Aizawa stepped in, wiping her hands on a dish towel. She smiled at Haruto warmly. "How's it going, Haruto? If you're planning to cook, maybe you should take a break before you burn down the kitchen." Haruto smiled sheepishly. "Yeah, I'm realizing maybe I was better off just sticking to sketching." Mrs. Aizawa chuckled, then turned to her daughter. "Sakura, could you take care of the register for a moment? I need to grab something from the storeroom." Sakura nodded, and as she passed Haruto, she gave him a brief, slightly playful look. "Guess I'm stuck with the mess now." Before he could respond, the doorbell of the cafe rang, signaling the entrance of a customer. Haruto turned, surprised to see Rin walking in, her usual sharp expression softened by the afternoon light. "Rin?" Haruto asked, his voice uncertain. "What are you doing here?" Rin shrugged, her eyes scanning the cozy interior. "I was in the area and thought I'd grab a coffee." She walked up to the counter and slid into a seat at the bar, her gaze landing on Sakura. "Sakura, I need something strong today. I'm dealing with Kaido's disaster." Sakura raised an eyebrow but didn't argue. "Coming right up. You know, you could always just tell him to knock it off." Rin's lips curled into a smirk. If only it were that easy. That idiot's persistence is infuriating. Haruto chuckled softly, though a part of him felt sympathy for Kaido. The guy was hopeless when it came to matters of the heart. As Sakura prepared Rin's coffee, Haruto watched the two girls interact. There was an odd, unspoken camaraderie between them, one that Haruto didn't fully understand but was starting to appreciate. They may have their differences, but Sakura and Rin both had a depth to them that Haruto couldn't ignore. Suddenly, Mrs. Aizawa returned from the storeroom with a large box in her hands. She set it down on the counter with a thud. "Haruto, can you take care of this?" Mrs. Aizawa asked, unwrapping the box to reveal a stack of delicate ceramic cups. Haruto, eager for something to do other than make pancakes, agreed. "Sure." As he carefully stacked the cups on the shelves, Sakura returned to his side. She seemed unusually quiet, and Haruto noticed the subtle tension in her shoulders. "You okay?" Haruto asked, glancing at her from the corner of his eye. Sakura met his gaze, her expression unreadable for a moment. She sighed softly. "It's just a lot sometimes. The cafe, school, everything." Haruto nodded, unsure of how to respond. He could sense the weight in her words but didn't want to push her too hard. Sakura had always been good at hiding her emotions, especially when it came to her family. But seeing her like this, vulnerable, made him feel like maybe he could be the one to offer her support, even if it was just in small, subtle ways. Before he could say anything else, Mrs. Aizawa called out from the kitchen. "Sakura, do you mind handling the next order?" Sakura nodded, brushing off her earlier tension with a forced smile. "Coming." She glanced at Haruto one last time. "Thanks for the help." Haruto watched her walk away, and as he turned back to the stacks of cups, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Sakura than she let on. But for now, all he could do was offer his silent support. Chapter 4, Typhoon Truths. The school's gymnasium converted for the night into a makeshift shelter during an unexpected typhoon. The wind howls outside and rain patters against the windows. Inside, the students are gathered in small groups, lounging on gym mats and making the best of the situation. The atmosphere is a mix of restlessness and camaraderie as everyone settles in for the night. The storm had come out of nowhere. One moment, the sky had been clear, and the next, the winds picked up, bringing dark clouds and heavy rain. By the time the principal made the call for the students to stay overnight at school, the typhoon had already begun to rage. Now, Haruto and his classmates were stuck in the gymnasium, waiting for the storm to pass. Haruto sat on the floor near the back of the gym, his back against the wall, observing the chaos unfolding around him. Students were chatting in small groups, playing cards, and some were even making the best of the situation by setting up an impromptu karaoke session. But despite the lighthearted mood, Haruto couldn't help but notice how restless Sakura seemed. She was sitting a few feet away, her eyes darting to the windows every now and then, clearly uncomfortable with the storm. It had been a long day. Haruto had already noticed that Sakura had been on edge lately. Ever since the cafe incident, she seemed to be carrying an invisible weight. Something was bothering her, but he hadn't had the chance to ask her about it. And now, with the typhoon trapping them at school overnight, it felt like the perfect opportunity to talk. He stood up slowly and made his way over to where she sat, her knees pulled to her chest as she stared out the window, lost in thought. "Sakura," Haruto said softly, sitting beside her. "You okay?" Sakura blinked, startled by his presence. She quickly composed herself, but Haruto could see the brief flicker of unease in her eyes. "Yeah, just not a fan of storms." Haruto nodded, but he wasn't buying it. He had seen how she had reacted earlier when the wind had started to howl, and the tightness in her posture told him there was more to it. Before he could press her further, Yui, of all people, approached with a mischievous grin plastered across her face. "Hey, why so serious, you too?" Yui teased, looking from Haruto to Sakura. "You know we're stuck here all night, right? Might as well have some fun." Sakura gave her a half-hearted smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I guess. Just not in the mood for games right now." Haruto could sense Sakura's unease, and for the first time in a while, he felt the urge to press her. But before he could speak, Yui snapped her fingers and grinned. "All right, I've got the perfect solution. How about a little game of truth or dare?" Yui said, her eyes gleaming with mischief. Nothing like a little chaos to pass the time. Haruto shot a look at Sakura, who hesitated, then gave a small shrug. Fine. But only because we're stuck here anyway. Haruto didn't say anything, but he didn't exactly like the idea of playing a game that might push Sakura's boundaries. Still, Yui had already begun gathering a small crowd of students, and before long, they were all sitting in a circle on the gym floor, ready to start. Haruto had no idea that this game would become the catalyst for something far deeper. The game began innocently enough with silly dares and playful questions. But as it progressed, the atmosphere shifted. Haruto found himself drawn into the circle, his gaze meeting Sakura's every so often, wondering just how much longer they could keep up the charade of normalcy. When it was Sakura's turn, she was given a simple truth: tell us something about yourself that we don't know. There was a brief pause, and Haruto watched as Sakura's eyes flickered as though she were debating whether or not to speak. The storm outside raged louder, the howling wind filling the room, adding a layer of tension. Sakura let out a sigh and then, surprisingly, answered. I used to write letters, she said, her voice barely audible over the storm. Letters to someone. To apologize. The confession hung in the air, and Haruto felt the sudden weight of her words. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make him wonder, who was this person? What had happened? Sakura quickly glanced around the circle, clearly uncomfortable with the attention. Next question, she mumbled, trying to brush it off. But Haruto couldn't help himself. He leaned forward, his voice soft but insistent. Who did you write to? Sakura's eyes widened slightly, and for a moment she seemed to freeze. Her lips parted as if she were about to say something but then closed again. She glanced away, her gaze turning toward the storm outside, her expression unreadable. I don't want to talk about it, she replied, her tone sharp, though there was an underlying sadness that made Haruto hesitate. Before he could respond, Yui interrupted with a dramatic gasp. Oh, a mysterious past. Someone's got secrets. The group laughed, but Haruto noticed how Sakura's shoulders stiffened. She quickly stood up, brushing off the laughter as she headed toward the exit. I'm going to get some air, she said quickly, not waiting for a response. Haruto stood up as well, a surge of frustration and concern rising in him. He could tell that whatever secret Sakura was hiding, it was something that haunted her. And for reasons he couldn't quite understand, he felt a strong urge to be the one to help her face it. Wait, Haruto called, walking toward the door, but Yui grabbed his arm. Let her go, Haruto, Yui said, her tone serious for once. She'll come back when she's ready. Haruto hesitated, then nodded. He knew Yui was right, but something about Sakura's pain pulled at him. He couldn't just ignore it. Chapter 5, Fireworks Invitation. A quiet, sun-drenched afternoon at school as the summer festival approaches. The campus is abuzz with preparations for the upcoming event, and the excitement is palpable. Haruto and Sakura find themselves in the school courtyard, the moment quiet yet heavy with unspoken words. The summer festival was just around the corner. As the days passed, the excitement in the school grew. Posters of the event were plastered on every bulletin board, and students filled the courtyard with talk of food stalls, games, and, of course, fireworks. The sound of laughter echoed through the halls, but despite the cheer, Haruto couldn't shake the feeling that something important was missing. Sakura. After the Truth or Dare game the night before, he hadn't seen much of her. She had gone quiet again, retreating into her usual shell. Even when they crossed paths during school hours, her smile was polite but distant, her eyes betraying the weight of something deeper. He had to do something. It had been on his mind since that night, and now, with the summer festival coming up, Haruto figured it might be the right time. He had been waiting for a chance, a moment where he could finally ask her about the things that had been left unsaid. But there was something else nagging at him, something about Sakura that he still couldn't quite place. Hey, Haruto said, his voice calm but with a hint of determination as he approached her near the edge of the courtyard. Sakura was sitting on a bench, flipping through a notebook, her face hidden behind a few strands of hair. The wind picked up, tousling her bangs slightly, but she didn't seem to notice. Sakura looked up, startled by his voice. She smiled, but it was that smile, the one she always wore when she wanted to hide what she was really feeling. Oh, Haruto. Didn't see you there, she said, closing the notebook quickly. You've been quiet, Haruto observed, sitting down next to her. More than usual. Sakura hesitated, her eyes flickering toward the sky for a moment before she shrugged it off. Just tired, I guess. Lots to do with the festival. Haruto nodded, but he could tell that wasn't the real reason. He had seen this before. There was something weighing on her, something that went beyond just school stress. It was the same feeling he had gotten after the cafe incident when she had retreated into herself. Are you planning to go to the festival? Haruto asked, his voice casual but with an edge of curiosity. Sakura paused, looking at him for a moment as if considering his question more seriously than it appeared. I don't know. It's just a festival. It's not like anything special. Haruto could tell she was avoiding the subject again. But he wasn't going to let it slide this time. He took a breath and turned to face her, his eyes steady. Would you go if I asked you? Sakura's eyes widened slightly, and for a moment, Haruto could see a flicker of surprise, then something else, something that he couldn't quite interpret. What? Sakura stammered, blinking. You want me to go with you? Haruto nodded, his gaze unwavering. Yeah. I was planning to go with a group of people, but I thought maybe we could go together. I mean, it's just the two of us, right? Could be fun. For a moment, there was silence between them, the sounds of the courtyard fading into the background as the weight of Haruto's invitation settled in the air. Sakura's gaze softened, though there was still a hint of something she wasn't ready to share. She fiddled with her fingers, hesitating before she finally spoke. I don't know, Haruto. I'm not really good at this kind of thing. Haruto gave a small, teasing smile. Not good at fun? No, Sakura replied, a slight edge to her voice. At being with other people. You know, letting things go. Haruto's expression shifted, his smile fading as he looked at her more closely. You know, you don't have to do everything by yourself, Sakura. Her eyes flickered with something, a mix of frustration and vulnerability, but she quickly masked it, looking away toward the festival preparations in the distance. I'm fine, she said quietly, almost to herself. Haruto, however, wasn't ready to let her push him away again. There was something about her, something in the way she shut herself off from others that made him want to keep reaching out. He had a feeling that this festival, this moment, could be the turning point. Look, Haruto said, his voice softer now, if you want to avoid it all, I get it. But if you want someone to go with, I'm here. Sakura remained silent for a long moment, her fingers still fidgeting with the edges of her notebook. Finally, she looked up at him, her expression unreadable. But there was something in her eyes, something like a quiet realization. Maybe, Sakura started, then paused as though trying to find the right words. Maybe it wouldn't be so bad. If you're going, I could go with you. A small but genuine smile tugged at the corner of Haruto's lips. Great. It'll be fun. She nodded, but Haruto could tell that the decision wasn't an easy one for her. There was more behind her words, something she wasn't saying, but he didn't push. Not yet. The conversation drifted into comfortable silence, and as the afternoon wore on, Haruto couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. Perhaps the summer festival would be a chance to break through the walls Sakura had built around herself. A chance for both of them to start moving forward. Chapter 6, Rin's Unexpected Gift. The day after Haruto's invitation to the summer festival. The school is alive with the excitement of the upcoming event. The weather is hot, the air thick with anticipation, and a sense of change seems to hang in the air. The days leading up to the festival were a whirlwind of activity. Everyone was buzzing with energy, decorating the school, setting up booths, and organizing schedules. The courtyard, usually quiet, had transformed into a vibrant display of colors, with banners swaying in the wind and groups of students laughing as they made final preparations. Sakura, however, seemed more withdrawn than ever. Even though she had agreed to go with Haruto, there was still an unease about her that he couldn't shake. She had been distant since their conversation the previous day, her mind clearly preoccupied with something beyond just the festival. Haruto had noticed the subtle signs, her avoidance of eye contact, the way she tucked herself into corners of the school, keeping herself busy but always a little too focused. She was running away from something, but what? Hey, Sakura, a voice called out, snapping Haruto from his thoughts. He turned to see Rin Fujimoto walking toward him, her sharp eyes scanning the crowd. There was a certain determination in her step, a quiet confidence that always seemed to accompany her. Sakura, who had been walking ahead, stopped when she heard Rin's voice. Rin had been the one to always get under her skin, their rivalry as old as Sakura's involvement in the literature club. But there was something different today, something that felt like it was building to a quiet moment of understanding. What's up, Rin? Haruto asked, giving her a slight nod as she reached them. I wanted to give this to Sakura, Rin said, a hint of hesitation in her usually confident tone. She held out a small, wrapped package carefully tied with a red ribbon. Sakura's eyes narrowed in confusion. For me? What's this? Rin's lips twitched slightly, a flicker of something softer than usual crossing her face. Just something I thought you might like. A token of sorts. Sakura hesitated, looking at the gift in Rin's hands with suspicion. They had never been the best of friends, their relationship defined more by rivalry than camaraderie. But something in Rin's eyes told her this wasn't the usual sharp-tongued challenge. I don't need anything from you, Rin, Sakura said, her voice tinged with her typical coolness. But the way Rin was holding out the gift made her pause. Maybe it was the sincerity in Rin's expression that made her finally take it. She took the package from Rin, untied the ribbon, and carefully opened it. Inside, there was an old poetry book, its cover worn, but the pages inside filled with delicate handwritten verses. Sakura's fingers lingered over the book, her expression unreadable. A poetry book? She asked quietly, her voice betraying a hint of surprise. Where did you find this? Rin shrugged, her face still guarded but with an undeniable warmth in her voice. It belonged to my grandmother. She was a poet. I thought it might help you find something you've been looking for. Sakura stared at the book for a moment longer, her mind racing. She had never expected Rin to do something like this for her. In fact, she hadn't expected anything from Rin at all. They were rivals, always battling for the title of the best in the literature club, each word they exchanged laced with competition. But this was different. This was an offering of understanding, something that Rin had clearly put thought into. It was a gesture of peace, maybe even respect. Sakura closed the book slowly, her fingers brushing against the cover as if she were deciding how to react. She could feel the weight of the gesture, but at the same time there was a sharp pang in her chest. Why? She asked, her voice quieter than usual. Rin shifted uncomfortably, looking away for a moment before meeting Sakura's gaze. Because I've always thought you were a little too much of a perfectionist. But maybe that's just because I see myself in you. You've got away with words even if you don't show it. Sakura's heart skipped a beat. It wasn't an apology, but it felt like one, like a bridge being extended between them, unspoken but clear. I don't need sympathy, Sakura said, though her voice lacked its usual sharpness. The words didn't feel as true as they once did. But thanks. Rin nodded, her usual arrogance returning, though softened by something more genuine. Don't get all sentimental. Just read it if you want. It's not going anywhere. As Rin turned to walk away, Sakura stood still for a moment, looking at the poetry book in her hands. It was more than just a book, it was a piece of the puzzle she hadn't known she needed. The gesture, the words, the quiet acknowledgement of what they both had been hiding. Haruto, who had been silently observing, stepped closer to her. Are you okay? He asked gently, his voice carrying a quiet concern. Sakura didn't answer immediately. She ran her fingers over the worn pages of the book again, the weight of Rin's gift settling in her hands. I don't know, Sakura finally said, her voice softer than usual. But I think I might be. Haruto gave a small, encouraging smile. That's good. For the first time in a while, Sakura let herself breathe. She didn't know what was ahead, but for now, she felt a little lighter. Chapter 7, Yukata Mishap. The day of the summer festival is finally here. The entire school is buzzing with excitement. Students in colorful yukatas stroll through the campus, preparing for the night's event where food stalls, games, and performances will fill the evening with laughter and joy. The air is heavy with the scent of summer flowers and the sound of cheerful chatter fills the courtyard. Sakura stood before her mirror, staring at the reflection in disbelief. The yukata she had carefully chosen, a delicate shade of soft blue with floral patterns that reminded her of the summer sky, and now hung awkwardly from her shoulders. She had never been one to wear traditional clothing, and today it felt particularly unfamiliar. The fabric clung in places where it shouldn't, and the obi, despite her best efforts, was far too tight, making her feel like she couldn't breathe properly. Ugh, she muttered under her breath, tugging at the hem of the yukata in frustration. She had always been the stoic, collected one. But today, as the festival approached, she felt oddly vulnerable. She wasn't used to showing her more delicate side, and yet here she was, trying to navigate this strange world of festival games and the weight of expectations. Just then, the door to her room creaked open, and her brother Takumi stepped inside, looking as disinterested as ever. You look like you're about to strangle yourself, Takumi observed, leaning against the doorframe with a smirk. You sure you know how to tie that thing? Sakura shot him a glare, not appreciating his comment. I'm fine, Takumi. Just not used to this. Takumi raised an eyebrow. Right? You should have asked Mom to help you. I didn't want to bother her. She's already doing a lot for the festival, Sakura said, her tone softer as she turned back to the mirror. Takumi grinned, unfazed by her response. Well, don't come crying to me when you get stuck trying to walk around like that. Sakura sighed, defeated. You're so helpful. Before Takumi could reply, there was a knock on the door. It swung open without waiting for an answer, and Haruto stepped inside, his usual calm expression making him seem unaffected by the festive chaos outside. I thought I heard you talking in here, Haruto said, his eyes scanning the room before settling on Sakura. How's the yukata fitting? Sakura immediately stiffened. It's fine, she muttered, tugging at it once more. It's just harder to wear than I thought. Haruto's eyes softened, but he didn't say anything for a moment. Instead, he stepped closer, his gaze lingering on her as if trying to understand her struggle. He was good at observing, but this time, something in his expression seemed different, a subtle hint of tenderness mixed with concern. You sure? He asked, his voice quieter than usual. Sakura couldn't bring herself to meet his gaze. I'm fine, she repeated, her voice a little firmer now. Takumi, sensing the moment, took the opportunity to slip away, leaving them alone in the room. Haruto hesitated for a moment before speaking again. If you want, I could help you with the obi. I've seen my mom tie it a few times. Sakura blinked, taken aback by his offer. You know how to tie an obi? Haruto shrugged, a small, almost imperceptible smile tugging at the corner of his lips. Not really, but I can give it a try. Despite herself, Sakura found herself chuckling. You're brave, I'll give you that. Haruto smiled at the sound of her laughter, but then his expression shifted, becoming more serious. I don't mind helping, he said softly. Really? Sakura hesitated for a long moment. She had always prided herself on handling things on her own, but something about Haruto's presence made her want to let go of that burden, if only for a little while. She nodded slowly, stepping back from the mirror. All right, I'll let you try. Haruto moved closer, his fingers brushing lightly against the fabric of the yukata as he worked to adjust the obi. His movements were careful, steady, almost like he was handling something fragile. The air between them was quiet except for the occasional sound of his fingers shifting the fabric. Sakura felt her breath catch in her throat, her heart suddenly racing in a way she hadn't anticipated. It wasn't just the close proximity, it was the way Haruto's focus seemed entirely on her, the way he was taking care with every small adjustment. As Haruto tied the final knot, he stepped back and gave her a small, approving smile. There? How does that feel? Sakura stood there, frozen for a moment, before she realized she was holding her breath. She exhaled slowly, glancing at herself in the mirror. The yukata now fit perfectly, the obi snug without being too tight. It's perfect, she said, her voice softer than usual. Haruto looked at her for a moment, his eyes lingering, as though he were trying to read the emotions she was hiding beneath her calm exterior. But before either of them could say anything more, there was a commotion outside the door, Takumi calling from the hallway, probably already bored of waiting. Hey, you two done in there yet? Takumi's voice rang out, making both Sakura and Haruto snap back to reality. Sakura quickly straightened herself up and turned to face Haruto. Thanks, Haruto. You're surprisingly good at this. Haruto gave a small, almost playful smile. I try. But as they made their way out the door, Sakura's heart still fluttered a little with the memory of how close they had been, how gentle his touch had been on her skin, and how natural it had felt to be in his company. A feeling she wasn't used to and wasn't quite ready to fully understand. Chapter 8. Lost Heirloom. The summer festival has come and gone, leaving behind an air of bittersweet nostalgia. The streets are quiet now, the remnants of the evening's celebrations scattered around the town. Sakura's necklace, a cherished heirloom from her late father, has gone missing, sending her into a panic. As the evening turns into night, Haruto and Sakura begin a search that will bring them closer in unexpected ways. The sounds of the festival still echoed faintly in the distance as Sakura stepped into her room, her heart sinking with every passing moment. She reached up to touch the delicate chain around her neck only to find it missing. Her breath caught in her throat as she frantically searched her room, her hands trembling. Her mind raced as she remembered the significance of the necklace. It was the last gift her father had given her before his untimely passing. It wasn't just a necklace, it was a piece of him. A piece of the past that she could never let go of. No, 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 no. Sakura whispered to herself, her voice thick with panic. She had to have dropped it somewhere. Maybe it had fallen off while she was changing for the festival? Or maybe it had slipped from her neck while she was talking to someone. She couldn't be sure. She quickly rushed out of her room, heading downstairs to search the rest of the house. Her mind was spinning with thoughts of where it could be. Her mother had already retired to bed and Takumi was no help, probably already lost in one of his games. But then, just as she was about to give up, she heard a soft knock on the door. Haruto stood in the hallway, his usual calm demeanor, but with a look of concern in his eyes. Sakura? Is everything okay? He asked quietly, his voice almost hesitant. Sakura froze for a moment, still clutching the empty space where the necklace should have been. Her heart was racing. She didn't want to burden him with something so trivial, but she couldn't deny the sinking feeling in her chest. I can't find my necklace, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Haruto's eyes softened. Your father's necklace? Sakura nodded, biting her lip to hold back the lump that had formed in her throat. It's gone. It's the only thing I have left of him. Haruto's gaze lingered on her for a moment before he nodded firmly. I'll help you find it. Sakura shook her head. You don't have to. It's my responsibility. But Haruto stepped closer, his voice steady. I want to help. You don't have to do this alone. Sakura blinked in surprise. She hadn't expected him to be so insistent, and she certainly hadn't expected him to offer his help so readily. A small part of her wanted to protest, to tell him it wasn't his problem. But something about his expression, the sincerity in his eyes, stopped her. Thank you, she said quietly, her voice trembling. The two of them spent the next few hours combing through every corner of her house. They checked the hallway, the living room, her bedroom, and even the garden outside where the faint scent of night-blooming flowers lingered in the air. The night was cool, but Sakura barely noticed the chill as she retraced every step she'd taken during the festival. Haruto's presence was a steady comfort. Every so often she would glance at him and he would give her a quiet nod or a reassuring glance. He didn't say much, but his actions spoke volumes. He was here. He was helping her. And that meant more to her than she was willing to admit. Finally, after what felt like hours of searching, they returned to Sakura's room. Haruto sat on the edge of her bed, his gaze thoughtful as he noticed something she hadn't. The small drawer in her desk was slightly open. Did you check this one? He asked, his voice quiet but with a hint of knowing. Sakura frowned. I didn't think to. She rushed over to the desk and pulled open the drawer. To her surprise, there, nestled among a few old notes and papers, was the necklace. Her heart skipped a beat as she picked it up, relief flooding her chest. The silver chain sparkled in the dim light, the pendant, a small, delicate charm in the shape of a cherry blossom, glowing softly. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she blinked them back quickly, not wanting to appear too vulnerable. I can't believe I missed this, she whispered, her fingers trembling as she held the necklace close to her chest. Haruto smiled faintly, though there was no mockery in his expression, only quiet understanding. It's okay. It's easy to miss things when you're stressed. Sakura nodded, feeling a sense of peace settle over her for the first time that night. Thank you, Haruto. He stood up and walked over to her, his expression soft. Anytime. For a moment, there was an unspoken connection between them, a shared moment of quiet, unburdened by the weight of words. And in that silence, Sakura realized something important. Haruto wasn't just a friend. He was someone she could trust, someone she could lean on when the world felt like it was falling apart. And for the first time in a long while, that realization didn't scare her. Chapter 9, Almost Kiss. The summer festival is in full swing, with laughter and chatter filling the air. Fireworks burst overhead, casting brilliant colors across the sky. Sakura and Haruto find themselves standing together by the riverbank, surrounded by the sounds of distant fireworks and the rustling of the festival crowd. A moment of quiet intimacy builds between them, but fate has other plans. The night sky was alive with color as fireworks exploded in brilliant reds, blues, and greens, casting fleeting reflections on the river below. The summer festival was in full swing, and people filled the streets, walking in groups, laughing and eating festival foods. The air was thick with the sweet smell of cotton candy and the savory aroma of takoyaki. Sakura stood beside Haruto at the riverbank, her yukata swishing slightly in the cool breeze. The festival lights flickered in the distance, the rhythm of the fireworks matching the rapid beat of her heart. She hadn't noticed it before, but now, standing so close to Haruto, the quiet between them felt different, charged, almost. Haruto, for his part, had been quieter than usual. He had always been reserved, but tonight there was something in his gaze that made Sakura's heart race. She turned her head slightly to look at him, only to find him already watching her, a soft smile playing at the corners of his lips. I didn't expect to end up here, Sakura murmured, her voice barely rising above the hum of distant chatter. I always thought I'd be with my family for the fireworks. But this is nice too. Haruto nodded, his expression unreadable. Sometimes things don't go as planned. But that doesn't mean they can't be just as good. Sakura hesitated, the quiet moment feeling too personal, too intimate for her usual level of comfort. She turned her eyes back to the fireworks, trying to calm the growing feeling in her chest. Her fingers brushed the necklace she had so recently found, a comforting reminder of her father. It brought her some peace, but she couldn't help feeling like something was changing, something between her and Haruto. The next firework burst above them, lighting up the sky in a brilliant display. In the flicker of the light, Haruto turned toward her, his gaze softening. Sakura. Her name on his lips felt different than before. It wasn't just a casual utterance, but something more personal, more intimate. She met his eyes, and for a moment, everything around them seemed to fade. The noise of the festival, the crowd, even the fireworks, everything disappeared. It was just the two of them. You know, Haruto began, his voice low, I never thought I'd come to care so much about someone else's feelings. Sakura's breath caught in her throat. She wasn't sure if it was the way he spoke or the intensity in his eyes, but she felt exposed in a way she hadn't before. She opened her mouth to respond, but before she could form the words, the fireworks went off again, louder this time, and for a brief moment, they both looked up. And that was when it happened. Without thinking, Haruto reached up, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face, his fingers lingering just slightly too long against her skin. Her heart skipped a beat, and she froze, not sure whether to pull away or lean closer. The world felt as though it was holding its breath. They were so close now, the space between them shrinking, the quiet pulling them together like the unspoken gravity of a shared moment. Just as they were about to close that final distance, something unexpected happened. A loud bang rang out in the air, and a firework rocketed straight into the ground. The crowd gasped in shock, and a chaotic burst of laughter followed. The magic of the moment shattered in an instant, and Sakura stepped back, startled by the sudden interruption. Her cheeks flushed with a mix of embarrassment and disappointment. Haruto blinked, his expression shifting back to its usual calm. Guess it wasn't meant to be, he said, the light-hearted tone returning to his voice. Sakura swallowed hard, trying to steady her breath. Yeah, she said, her voice tinged with a hint of frustration she couldn't quite suppress. Maybe it wasn't. They both stood there for a moment, the awkwardness settling between them, before Haruto cleared his throat. Let's get back to the others. The festival's almost over, right? Sakura nodded, her heart still racing as they turned away from the river. Yeah. Let's go. The walk back to the festival felt different than before. The distance between them had grown, not physically but emotionally. The unspoken moment hung between them like a door that was half open but never fully passed through. As they rejoined the others, the noise of the festival surrounded them once again, but Sakura couldn't shake the feeling that something important had just slipped through her fingers. Something she wasn't ready to face, but something that had been growing all along. Chapter 10, Bitter Chocolate. The days after the festival have a lingering warmth to them, both from the weather and the unspoken tension building between Haruto and Sakura. The school year is winding down, but the emotions between them are becoming more complicated as summer approaches. The days after the festival felt heavier than they should have. Haruto couldn't quite shake the feeling that something had changed, but he couldn't pinpoint what it was. Sakura had been distant ever since that night by the riverbank. She was still the same quiet, composed, yet there was a shift in her that he couldn't ignore. And now, with the summer break looming ahead, things were about to become even more tangled. Sakura sat quietly at her desk in the literature clubroom, her attention focused on the notebook in front of her. The hum of the air conditioner provided a faint background noise, but it did little to drown out the thoughts swirling in her head. The festival had been a turning point, she could feel it, but she didn't know what to do with the growing discomfort in her chest. It was as if the space between her and Haruto had gotten smaller, but the more it shrank, the more she wanted to run from it. But Sakura wasn't one to run, and she had made a promise to herself that she would confront her emotions, no matter how complicated they were. She sighed, closing her notebook with a soft snap. Today, she was going to do something. Something small, but perhaps enough to break the tension. Sakura had always been fond of chocolate, specifically the bitter kind. It was a comfort to her, a small piece of sweetness in a world that was often too sharp. So, when she spotted a box of gourmet dark chocolate at a local shop, she knew it would be the perfect gesture. She had prepared it carefully, wrapping the pieces neatly and leaving one on Haruto's desk after everyone had left the clubroom. Haruto arrived a bit later, as usual, his sketchbook under one arm. He had a tendency to arrive when everyone else had already left, preferring the quiet of the room to the bustling noise of the rest of the school. His eyes immediately went to the desk, and he noticed the small box resting on the corner. What's this? He muttered to himself, approaching it with a mix of curiosity and confusion. Sakura watched him from her seat in the corner of the room, her hands nervously twisting the edge of her notebook. She had no idea what had possessed her to leave it there. Was this really the best way to bridge the gap between them? Haruto picked up the box, his fingers running lightly over the smooth surface. When he opened it, his expression softened slightly, but there was a hint of something else, a slight hesitation in his eyes. You didn't have to do this, he said quietly, glancing up at her. Sakura swallowed, feeling the weight of his gaze. I know. It's just. I thought you might like it, she said, her voice unsteady. It's bitter, like you. I mean, like you always say you like bitter things. There was a faint blush on her cheeks, and for a moment, Haruto didn't respond. He just stared at the piece of chocolate, then back at her. You think I'm bitter? He asked, his voice almost teasing. Sakura's heart skipped. No, I meant. She cut herself off, shaking her head. Forget it. Haruto chuckled, the sound light but genuine. I was just teasing. Thanks, Sakura. I appreciate it. Sakura looked away, hoping he wouldn't notice the flush spreading across her face. It's just chocolate, she muttered, trying to play it off. Haruto smiled faintly before unwrapping a piece of the chocolate. He took a bite, his eyes briefly closing as he savored the flavor. It's good, he said after a moment, his tone sincere. Thanks for this. Sakura nodded, not quite able to meet his eyes. I'm glad you like it. For a moment, the room was silent, the weight of unspoken words filling the air. It wasn't enough to ease the tension between them, but it was something. A small gesture. A quiet moment. Haruto finished the chocolate, then glanced at her again, his expression softening slightly. You're different, he said, his voice low. The way you act around me, it's like you're trying to hide something. And I don't know what it is, but I can tell. Sakura's heart clenched in her chest. She didn't know how to respond. Part of her wanted to open up to him, to tell him everything, but the words felt stuck in her throat. She couldn't share her burdens, her fears, and regrets with him, not yet. I'm fine, she said, the words tasting empty even as she said them. I just think too much sometimes. Haruto didn't press further, but his eyes lingered on her for a moment longer than usual. He turned back to the chocolate box, now empty save for a few small pieces. You know, he began, sometimes it's okay to not be fine. You don't have to hide it, Sakura. Sakura's chest tightened at his words, but she didn't know how to respond. Instead, she just nodded. Thanks, she said softly. I'll keep that in mind. As Haruto left the room later that day, Sakura sat still for a moment, her fingers idly tracing the edge of her desk. There was something in the way Haruto had spoken to her, something she hadn't expected. Maybe she didn't have to hide everything from him. Maybe, just maybe, he was ready to help her bear the weight of her secrets. But for now, all she could do was wait and let the summer unfold. Chapter 11, Summer's End. The summer festival is nearing and the school year is about to end. The air feels heavier, filled with anticipation and the unspoken tension between Haruto and Sakura. The season of fireworks and fleeting moments is upon them, but so is a sense of unease, secrets not yet revealed, feelings left unsaid. The soft hum of cicadas filled the air, their song a constant reminder that summer was drawing to a close. The school grounds, usually bustling with students, were quieter now. The excitement for the upcoming summer festival was palpable, but it was overshadowed by the subtle shift in the atmosphere between Haruto and Sakura. Haruto couldn't stop thinking about the conversation they'd had about the chocolate. Her words, her hesitations, he knew something was going on, but every time he tried to get closer, she pulled back. It frustrated him, but more than that, it hurt. He had always been good at reading people, but Sakura was different. She was an enigma, one he wasn't sure he was ready to crack open. Sakura, on the other hand, was caught in a whirlwind of emotions. She had been spending the past few days going over every interaction with Haruto in her mind. Her heart raced every time she thought about him, but it also ached. The more time she spent with him, the more she felt like she was about to break, and that terrified her. As she stood near the cherry tree in the schoolyard, her fingers brushed against the bark, grounding herself. It was a moment of solitude before everything changed. Tomorrow was the day Haruto would finally ask her to the summer festival. She already knew it, had known for a while. But what would it mean for them? Would it be another fleeting moment like the cherry blossoms that would soon fall? Sakura's thoughts were interrupted by a familiar voice. Sakura. She turned around, finding Haruto standing just a few steps away, holding his sketchbook, his usual calm expression on his face. But his eyes, they were different. More intense. More searching. Haruto, she replied, her voice steady, though her heart was anything but. What's up? Haruto took a step forward, then hesitated. He opened his mouth to speak but paused again as though weighing his words. Finally, he asked, Are you going to the summer festival tomorrow? Sakura felt a flutter of something in her chest. She nodded, trying to keep her composure. I am. Why? He stepped closer, closing the distance between them. I was wondering if you'd go with me. As in, would you be my date? The words were out before he could stop them, and for a split second, both of them stood in silence, the world around them holding its breath. Sakura felt her heart race, but she kept her expression neutral, trying to mask the turmoil inside. This was the moment, wasn't it? The moment where everything changed. She could feel it, and yet, part of her wanted to run. She had never been good at this, at opening up to people, at letting someone in. But this was Haruto. And for some reason, she found herself wanting to say yes, despite everything she had built up to keep people at a distance. I don't know, Haruto, she said softly, avoiding his gaze. It's just, everything's moving too fast. His expression faltered just for a moment, but then he stepped closer again. It doesn't have to be fast. We can take things slow. I really want to be with you, Sakura. Sakura swallowed hard, her chest tight. The words were simple, but the weight of them was suffocating. Her heart was conflicted. She had spent so long keeping her feelings in check, pretending she wasn't affected by him. But now, with his sincerity laid bare before her, it was impossible to ignore. I'm not ready yet, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. But I will be, I think. One day. Haruto's eyes softened, understanding flickering in them. He gave her a small, reassuring smile. I can wait, he said simply, his voice full of sincerity. Sakura nodded, feeling a lump form in her throat. Thank you, Haruto. The silence between them lingered, but it wasn't uncomfortable. In fact, it was the most at peace she had felt in a long time. There was still uncertainty, still fear, but there was also something else. Hope. As the evening sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the school grounds, Haruto and Sakura stood side by side under the cherry tree, each lost in their own thoughts. But despite everything, one thing was certain, their relationship had changed. Something had shifted between them, and while the future was still uncertain, for the first time, they both felt like they could face it together. Chapter 12, Akira's Arrival. The beginning of a new chapter in Haruto and Sakura's summer as new challenges approach with the arrival of Akira Hayami, Sakura's flirtatious cousin. Unspoken tension continues to build as secrets begin to surface. The day was like any other as Haruto made his way through the crowded hallways of the school. Summer had arrived in full force, and with it, the soft hum of excitement for the festival that was just around the corner. However, something was off, something he couldn't quite place. Maybe it was the way the air seemed to thrum with anticipation, or maybe it was the undeniable tension that had been lingering between him and Sakura for the past few weeks. Sakura had been distant lately, still processing the events of their heart-to-heart under the cherry tree. Despite the lingering hesitations, he knew she was coming around. It was just a matter of time. However, Haruto's thoughts were interrupted as a sudden burst of energy rushed past him. He turned just in time to see a flash of bright hair and a mischievous grin. Hey, Haruto, a voice called, and he turned to see Akira Hayami, a new transfer student. The tall, dark-haired boy grinned, flashing a cocky smile. You must be Haruto, right? Haruto blinked, his brow furrowing in confusion. Yeah, that's me. Who are you? Akira leaned against the lockers casually, his grin never faltering. I'm Akira. Just transferred here. And I've heard a lot about you already. He raised an eyebrow, clearly teasing. It's nice to meet you. The words weren't malicious, but there was something unsettling about the way Akira spoke, as if he were sizing Haruto up. Haruto couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this boy than met the eye. Before he could respond, Akira's attention shifted, his eyes locking onto something in the distance. Haruto followed his gaze, and his stomach churned when he saw who Akira was looking at, Sakura. She was walking down the hallway with Rin, her literature club rival, chatting about something animatedly. Akira's eyes glinted with a playful interest as he pushed off the lockers and began making his way toward them, leaving Haruto with a sudden surge of unease. Nice to meet you, Haruto. Akira said again, his voice more carefree this time. I'm sure we'll get along just fine. Haruto stood frozen for a moment, watching as Akira approached Sakura, his posture open and confident. A mix of discomfort and jealousy stirred within him. Why did this boy feel so familiar, so dangerous? He shook his head, trying to focus. But before he could move forward, something caught his eye, a fleeting glance, the way Sakura's eyes flicked toward Akira. Haruto couldn't put his finger on it, but there was something different about her expression. It wasn't the usual polite indifference. It was almost guarded. Meanwhile, across the hall, Sakura felt an inexplicable sense of unease as Akira approached her. He was charming, of course, with his playful grin and effortless charisma. But there was something about him that unsettled her. Perhaps it was the fact that she had been hearing his name more and more lately, first from her parents, then from her friends, and now from Haruto. Sakura had known Akira for a long time. He was always the troublemaker, always a little too charming for his own good. She never imagined he'd end up at her school, especially not now when she was already struggling to make sense of her own feelings. Akira, right? She said coolly, trying to mask the disquiet in her chest. What brings you here? Akira smiled mischievously. Oh, just a bit of family business. And I wanted to see you, of course, he added, his tone teasing as his eyes flicked toward her. You've grown up, Sakura. It's nice to see you again. Sakura's smile was tight. It's been a while. Akira leaned in a little closer as if trying to pick up on her discomfort. Yeah, but I haven't forgotten the old days. So how about we catch up sometime? Her pulse quickened. She wanted to say no. She wanted to brush him off and make it clear that things were different now, that she wasn't the same girl she used to be. But something in Akira's presence made her hesitate. "I'll think about it," she replied, her voice firmer than she felt. Akira's smile widened and he took a step back, his eyes still lingering on her. "I'm sure you will. We'll talk soon, Sakura." And with that he walked off, leaving Sakura standing there, a mix of emotions swirling inside her. What had just happened? Why did she feel so unsettled? And why did her heart race every time Akira smiled at her like that? Haruto watched from a distance, the weight of what he'd just seen settling over him like a thick fog. He couldn't explain why, but something about Akira made him uneasy. It wasn't just the way he'd looked at Sakura, it was the way he made everything feel a little too much like a game. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. This summer had promised to be simple, a chance for him and Sakura to figure things out. But now with Akira's arrival, things were anything but simple. And it seemed like this summer, full of fleeting beauty and hidden secrets, was only just beginning. Thanks for watching our video. If you find this video interesting, then please subscribe our YouTube channel. If you're watching this video from TikTok, Facebook, or Instagram, then follow our page for more contents like this.